Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a really fascinating snapshot of modern enterprise security. We're zeroing in on the short, violent life of a critical zero-day exploit.
That's right. We're digging into CVE 2025-47761.
Exactly. It's a vulnerability found in the FortiClient VPN for Windows. And it's just a brilliant case study because it shows you exactly how an attacker can, gain power inside a machine. Okay, let's unpack this. What makes this one so interesting for analysis isn't just the flaw itself, which is this tiny 4-byte write primitive inside a kernel driver, but it's what the whole story forces us to talk about. You see two huge strategic lessons here. First, how operating systems like Windows 11 24H2 are getting so much smarter, hardening themselves to force attackers into these really elaborate multi-bug exploit chains.
And the second lesson.
And second, we get this painful look at the gap, right? The months-long gap between when a vendor secretly fixes a flaw and when they actually tell the world about the danger.
That's exactly right. For you, the listener, whether you're managing security or just curious about how systems break, our mission is to get past the jargon. We need to understand the mechanism of this arbitrary write primitive, map out the incredible timeline, and then really focus on why this vulnerability.
Which used to be a total system killer on its own.
Exactly. Why it now requires chaining with a second exploit just to work on a modern OS.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive into defense in depth.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Identity and location. Where was this thing actually hiding?
The flaw was tucked away inside a kernel driver called FortiClient This driver is essential. It runs with the highest privileges because it's managing IP security for the FortiClient VPN on Windows.
And the core issue.
The core issue was, simple but catastrophic. It was a mishandled input-output control called an IOCTL that resulted in what we call an arbitrary 4-byte write primitive.
4 bytes. It sounds so small. In a world of gigabytes, how can 4 bytes possibly lead to a full system takeover?
Well, you have to think of kernel memory less like a huge hard drive and more like a vast control panel that's just covered in switches.
Okay.
4 bytes is more than enough to flip one or two of the most critical switches on that panel. And if an attacker can control where those 4 bytes are written, that's the arbitrary part, they can target a critical control structure and get either a system crash or, more likely, full system-level privilege escalation.
That makes the power of that precision very clear. Let's talk about the timeline, because this is where the first really big strategic lesson comes in. Who found this, and why does the reporting date matter so much?
So the initial discovery was made on January 31st, 2025 by Alex Giotto of the HackerHood community. And Fortinet, to their credit, they acknowledged the issue pretty quickly. But the path from that discovery to public knowledge was complex and delayed. The vendor integrated the patch relatively early, releasing versions 7.4.4 in September 2025.
Okay, so a fix was available in September.
Right, but here's the strategic problem. They only formalized the vulnerability, gave it the official CVE number, CVE 2025-47761, and published the public bulletin on November 18th, 2025.
So wait, let me get this straight. If I'm a security manager, I had a fixed version available for 2 full months.
September and October.
But if I wasn't told there was a 0-day hiding in that fix, I would have no reason to prioritize that update over anything else, really.
Precisely. That lag destroys resource allocation, a new high-severity CVE that jumps right to the top of everyone's to-do list. But if the fix is silent, if it's just bundled into a routine version bump, it gets deployed whenever it's convenient.
And then the bulletin drops in November, and suddenly everyone realizes they've been sitting on a critical fix for months, potentially exposed.
It's an enormous risk management headache.
We have to come back to that lag later. For now, let's get into the mechanics. The first hurdle for any attacker is just access. This is a sensitive kernel driver. Why can a low-privilege user like maybe even a sandboxed browser talk to it at all?
This is really the aha moment of kernel driver analysis. You have to ask, who is this driver listening to? And when you look at it with a tool like WinObject, you see immediately that the FortiP74.sys driver, it just didn't set up restrictive security permissions.
It sounds like they just went with the defaults.
They did. The driver creates its kernel device without defining any custom DACLs, discretionary access control lists. DACLs are basically the security rulebooks for Windows objects.
And by not defining a custom one?
It falls back to the system's default security descriptor.
And what does the default say?
It essentially says, system and administrators have full access, and all other authenticated users can open a handle for limited interaction.
So the driver's just too sociable.
Way too sociable. It allows any process on the system, even those running with low integrity, to open a handle and start sending it commands via IOCTL.
So the security was like a sign on a vault door saying, admins enter here, but they forgot to actually lock the door.
That's a perfect analogy. But wait, there's one more piece. A driver has to be loaded and running before you can even talk to it.
Right. So how does a low-privilege attacker get it running? Do they need another bug for that?
Not at all. The main FortiClient process starts the IPsec service by sending a config buffer to a native pipe. The important thing is that call is enough to start the driver even without admin rights.
So just running the FortiClient app or maybe trying to start a VPN connection, that's enough to set the stage for the attack.
Exactly. The source material had a great little anecdote about this. In the vulnerable version, you could just create a fake IPsec profile, set the remote gateway to google.it or something, and that was enough to confirm the driver would load and be ready for exploitation. No admin rights needed.
And that kind of simplicity is what makes a vulnerability truly dangerous. So the groundwork is laid, the driver's running, anyone can talk to it. Here's where it gets really interesting. Now that we know how the attacker got in the door, let's talk about the specific command, the IOCTL, that caused the failure.
We're looking at IOCTL code 0x2C803. And the reason it's so dangerous isn't just the code itself, but the method it uses for data transfer. It uses method neither,
Which our listeners might know
is widely seen as the most dangerous way to handle data exchange in the Windows kernel.
Can you break that down for us? Why does method neither carry such a high risk?
Sure. Think of an IOCTL as a specific request form you hand to a driver. Most methods, like buffered or direct, have a built-in security guard, the Windows kernel itself. It checks your permissions, it copies the data into a safe kernel buffer, and then it hands the clean data to the driver.
Okay, so there's a middleman.
A very important middleman. But method neither tells that security guard to take a coffee break. The kernel just passes the user mode pointers, the raw memory addresses, directly to the driver. It basically says, hey driver, you figure this out.
So all the responsibility for checking if the address is valid, if the size is right, all of that falls on the developer who wrote the driver.
Exactly. And in this case, the developer missed those checks. The driver uses the caller-provided user buffer, that raw, unvalidated pointer, directly to write its output. And just like that, a normal API call becomes a critical arbitrary kernel mode write.
What did the attacker's input have to look like to actually trigger this?
It was surprisingly simple. To hit the vulnerable code path, a specific flag, the code field in the first 24 bytes of their buffer had to be set to the value 0x63. That was the key.
And once that key turned the lock?
Once inside that branch, the driver's logic copied exactly 4 bytes from an uninitialized area of the kernel stack, we often call it stack chunk, directly to the arbitrary kernel address the attacker provided.
That brings up a crucial question. If you're writing random stack chunk, aren't you more likely to just crash the system than gain privileges?
That's a sharp question, and in theory, yes. But in practice, kernel exploitation is a very precise science. Even though the attackers can't control the content of those 4 bytes, they control the location.
Ah, I see.
They only need to overwrite a single, known, critical flag inside the process token structure, which governs privileges. Think of it like this. You might be shooting 4 random electrical sparks, that's the junk data, but you know the exact spot on a massive switchboard where the master system power switch is.
So you aim your spark right there.
You aim right there. Those 4 bytes will flip that critical switch pretty much regardless of what the surrounding data is. That's the power of location control.
That perfectly illustrates why it's so potent. Okay, let's pivot to the counterattack. We know how easy it was to trigger the flaw, how powerful it is. But this is a modern vulnerability. How did Windows fight back?
This is where we see the layered defense from the operating system vendor really working. The goal of the exploit is privilege escalation.
Right.
And you do that by manipulating the process's security token, the token.
The proof of concept did this by enabling what? The seed bug privilege.
That's right, enabling seedbug privilege, which lets you then run a command prompt as the ultimate user. System.
But to do any of that, you have to know where the token structure is in memory first.
Exactly. That's the fundamental prerequisite. If you're shooting blind, you'll just cause a crash. Attackers have traditionally used an API call, enquery system information, to reliably leak that kernel address.
And this is where Windows 11 comes in.
This is the crucial defense layer in Windows 11 24H2. Microsoft changed the rules for enquery system information. Starting with that build, if you want to query information that reveals sensitive kernel addresses, like your own process token's address,
You have to already have the privilege.
you must already possess the cdebug privilege.
That's brilliant. It's a classic catch-22. The operation you need to find the address for the attack now requires the very privilege you're trying to gain with the attack.
It totally breaks the traditional exploit flow. For a standard user on a fully patched Windows 11 24H2 system, the precondition for using this FortiClient flaw is just gone. The bug is still there in the driver, sure, but the ability to aim it is blocked.
So on a modern, updated system, this critical zero-day is essentially demoted to a denial of service bug. You can crash the system, but you can't reliably escalate your privileges.
That's the outcome. And it forces attackers to get much more complex. The researchers who built the PRC confirmed this. To get it to work on a patched Windows 11 24H2 machine, they couldn't just use the FortiClient flaw by itself.
They needed something else.
They had to chain it with a second, totally independent vulnerability. CVE-2025-47761. This second bug was a race condition that let them leak the token address, bypassing Microsoft's new defense.
That really drives home the strategic shift. A few years ago, an arbitrary 4-byte write was a guaranteed system shell. Game over.
Right.
Today, the OS is smart enough that it turns that one bug into a multi-stage problem that requires at least 2 separate flaws to succeed.
It raises the barrier to entry significantly. Attackers now need to find and chain multiple high-quality bugs just to achieve what a single one did before. It's a huge win for OS security hardening.
So what does this all mean? This deep dive into CVE 2025-47761 gives us this really clear picture of an ongoing battle. On one side, you have a powerful fundamental mistake in an application, a vendor driver just carelessly mishandling a dangerous IOCTL.
But that mistake is being countered by this increasing strategic intelligence at the OS level. Microsoft recognized that address leakage is the first step to memory corruption, so they built a brilliant defense that forces complex exploit chains. The fight is now fought in layers.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that organizational problem of the disclosure timeline. The fix was out in September 2025, but the public acknowledgement was in November.
And that lag is the final crucial takeaway for you, the listener, especially if you handle risk. If a vendor puts out a patch months before the CVE, how does that silence impact your priorities? You might be delaying a critical patch because it just looks like a routine update.
Well, in reality, it's mitigating a zero-day that threat actors might already know about.
Right. It fundamentally changes the conversation about risk. The vulnerability isn't just in the code, it's in the transparency, or the lack of it, around how it gets fixed.
It demands that security managers have to be incredibly proactive.
They have to be. You have to start asking vendors, what else is in this update? Are there any unannounced fixes for severe bugs? Because in this era of layered defense, waiting for the official CVE might leave you exposed for months longer than necessary. And that ultimately is the risk management question this whole case raises for everyone.